gonna start recording. I'm gonna share my screen. Let me exit from here. So the first part is I just want you to pay attention to what I'm doing and ask questions. I'm gonna be writing the same test that we wrote for the previous app, but I'm gonna go rather quickly. I wanna spend maybe like an hour and a half, so that you have like a full hour to write your own test. And again, I'll put you in breakout rooms. You'll collaborating and asking questions of each other, and I'll be floating around the rooms to aid as necessary. So let's take a look at the lesson. I'm going to share also the lesson content here. And after the lesson, I'll make sure to upload the video to YouTube, share the link in our new channel, and as well as the link to this lesson. So this is the same lesson that we did like 3 months ago. So you can see by the timestamp there. So let me go quickly over some of the introductory stuff. So we're going to be using the React testing library. The React testing library is part of a larger project called the testing library project. And that has some other testing libraries, like if you're building something in Vue or in React Native, there's like a handful of others. The testing library project is like the mother project of all of them. We're going to be looking at their documentation, but know that, you know, if maybe later on you're building something else in some other framework, you can use the testing library for that. One important concept that I hope to be reiterating, and I hope to also make you aware of, is that we want to test for functionality and not for implementation. What that means is we want to make our tests resemble as much as possible the way in which a user will interact with our apps. And for instance, an implementation detail that we shouldn't care about is whether our component is using like React classes with regular state versus using hooks, for instance, for state management. That's an implementation detail that we shouldn't take into account in our test. Like our test should be answering questions like, does X happen when the button is clicked? Or does the user see this content when they hover over an element, or when they submit a form, etc. So we're going to be thinking functional for implementation. That is a sort of a mantra that the testing library project goes throughout. Has anybody explored testing of React apps before, maybe individually or on their own?
Well, I haven't explored testing, but just to kind of like, I know that last time you had the lesson, you were saying that I guess the common practice is to build the test first. That would be the best practice.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
So my question is, maybe this might be a little off topic, but my question is like, how do you know so besides like something as simple as a button and a form and, you know, just making sure that your request is actually happening, so on and so forth, like, how do you know, like, what kind of test would you want to write, like, as things get more complex? Because I can imagine like the type of CTAs that we had, I cloned Twitter, and I didn't know, like, I planned everything out, but as soon as I got to like actually doing everything that I had planned out, there were so many other problems that I could never foresee unless I was there. So I don't know if this is off topic, but that's what I've been like, that's what I was kind of thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, so your question has sort of two sides to it. What you mentioned at the beginning is writing the test first. We're not going to do that. I think that is known as test-driven development, or TDD, where where you write the test first and then you write the code. I feel like you will do test driven development like once you feel very comfortable with testing, as a whole, where you have like experimented and know how to write tests. So at some point you can start thinking, oh, I'm going to build this app. I'm going to write the test for it beforehand. And the second part of your question, being how do you know what to test? That was a question that I struggle with, and I feel like I still don't have a definitive answer. But as I was reviewing some content today, I realized what you should test are user stories or user journeys. So I really like, for instance, I know that the 6.4 CTA format was different from the 6.2 CTA format. Let me see if I can pull out yours. Yeah. So for instance, so for the 6.2 fellows in the room, for 6.4 it had to clone an app, either Twitter, Yelp, Reddit, Facebook, or Instagram. And they had to have this basic functionality. So if you're cloning Twitter, you have your homepage shows all tweets, a user page that shows the user's specific tweets, a form to write new tweets with 280 character limit, etc. So we could say that these are user stories, are things that the user will be able to do once with the app. And we can break this down a bit more. So that's an exercise that I want us to do. Think about what are user stories on your app, and then write some tests for those. So one example could be like, let's take this one for instance. A form to write new tweets with 280 character limit. So here we can test a few things. Well, it could test two things. One, let's make sure that when we render the component that's supposed to render the form is actually there. Let's test that the user can type something in. Let's test that. So one simple form. Well, one test could be, let's check that the form is there and that the user can type in it. The other test could be, let's test that whenever the user tries to type more than 280 characters, the form doesn't let you enter more characters. Another will be, let's test that once the user has entered a text that is less than 280 character, that the user can actually submit the text, the text to our backend, or that the form is actually submitted. So to answer that question, like how do we know what to test? Think about user stories and sort of edge cases within those user stories. Like what happens if the user types in more than 280 character? Maybe I think Twitter, it will depend on the app, but I think Twitter will actually show you a message at the bottom.
Yeah, I think it does that, and it goes like negative. It shows you that you have you had 280 word characters, and then it just goes negative. At least the desktop.
I see. Yeah. So for instance, that's something that we could also, that's something we could also test that. Okay, maybe then the form lets you enter more than 280 characters, but the button should be disabled. The user cannot submit it. So we could check that if the user puts more than that, that the submit button is disabled. And maybe we can check also for the counter or the little message that says you're over the limit, for example. So whenever you're thinking about what to test in this context, think about user stories and think about maybe breaking those user stories into individual test cases and possibly like edge cases of when something happens. What happens if the user submits an empty form? Maybe a message shows up saying you cannot submit an empty form or something like that. We can test for that. So think about user stories whenever we're thinking about what to test. And then we're gonna learn how to, we're gonna review how to do that. And then more importantly, I think, having you think about, okay, what is what I want to test, and let's actually, put our fingers in motion to write that.
Yeah,
So
and I'm happy that you
yeah.
brought up that example with like Twitter, because that's what I did. And like it was like, for instance, for when I created the which was extremely, it was way more difficult than anyone probably would expect it to be, as
Mhm.
far as the tweet functionality behind Twitter. um like a lot of those things I could not anticipate, like the issues that I came across with just being able to like have that all function just like how Twitter has it functioning, was like,
Mhm.
it was crazy. And kind of like testing for it for me,
Mhm.
like it's almost like I tested as I built the application, versus like kind of like thinking of the possible issues that you may come across. And like, for instance, the type of test that you suggested, those things for me were like, it's like the, I guess it's different when you're cloning, but obviously the functionality and what it's supposed to do, you see it, so you kind of just like think of the logic behind it, and then you build it.
Go for it.
Versus
Yeah.
like, so like for that, that's one thing. So it was kind of like testing it as I went along. But when I think about testing, I think about like a scenario that I had with, I don't know if 6.2 did it, but we had we had to build the weather widget. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the main issues that I had with the widget was getting the location first before I send out the actual request with that location, to be able to get all the weather information and all of that stuff, because we were using geolocation. So
Mm-hmm.
that function and that functionality, sometimes it takes longer than you expected, and the timing is always different. It's never the same time. Sometimes it could be fast, sometimes it could be slow, but that request to the weather API, it's always there. So kind of like, I remember at that time it was pretty difficult for me. So like when I think about a test, I think of like implementing a test in like a scenario like that, where it's like, okay, we want to always make sure that we have the location first before we send out the request to the weather API, so we don't break the app or crash anything. So I'm kind of like trying to get in the mindset of like, when, why, where should I test, and what I should be thinking about as far as like testing is concerned, because testing
Mm-hmm.
is pretty cool. It's a big thing in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like, the one of the reasons why I'm putting so much emphasis in this is because I think testing could give you an edge in getting a job, because not a lot of junior developers know how to do it. Um, so
Yeah,
so if
exactly.
you get comfortable with it and you can list it in your resume, I think that should get some more eyes on your resume, and hopefully more invitations to interviews, etc.
I agree.
And I think you mentioned one thing, like that, maybe I'll touch on briefly, where when our app does side effects, like, for a side effect is like accessing geolocation or making a network request. Those are very some examples. Or another side effect will be like accessing the window object on the browser.
Yeah.
When our app does those side effects, when we want to test those, we're going to need to mock the behavior of those. So for your example, where you were accessing the geolocation API from the browser, and you realize that every time it takes a little bit more or a little bit less, it's not for sure how long it's going to take. We would mock that. And we'll see a little bit of that on mocking Axios. The framework sort of translates. Um, but yeah, and Axios is another example where our app is having that side effect of finding a network request. We'll need to mock that, sort of to control it. And then we could mock the scenario where the network request goes well, or when the network request actually doesn't go well, like what happens when it doesn't go well? What do we display,
I like
etc.
I like that.
Cool. Okay, so let's move on. So these are some of the types of testing sort of as a whole. There is unit testing where you test only the unit. A unit could be a single function or a single component, sort of any independent part of any system, really. Um, and that is, this is sort of the visualization. We're going to do a little bit of unit testing. We're going to do a little bit of integration testing. Integration testing is when you are testing the relationship between two or more components. And this, I was actually, there is a guy called Kent C. Dodds. He is a very like a notable JavaScript developer, specialized sort of in testing. And he said we should have the pyramid. I don't think he has it here. The pyramid, not the pyramid, the trophy of testing. Let's say trophy, testing trophy, which will look somewhat like this, where and just where he says, well, we should have more integration tests because that's where actually the fun things happen, or things can break more easily. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have unit tests, but we should have more integration tests. And there's some really interesting articles. This is one of those that I can link after for you to read. But going back here, this is, we're gonna write some unit tests. I hope to give a few examples of where those are helpful. But more interesting are these tests where components are talking to each other, passing data between each other. That is like where business logic is being handled more heavily. And this is some of the tests that we want to put some emphasis on. And here we're just checking how do the two units integrate. That's why it's called an integration test. There's another type of test called end-to-end test, or also known as system testing. I was thinking it will be cool to see these maybe later on in another session. There is something called Cypress, which is a system that is a testing, sort of a browser environment for testing that'll let you like click on things, like you automate it to click on things, to type things on your forms, and to hit submit, and so on. And I think it's kind of cool and it's helpful. But generally these tests are a bit less reliable because the tests are broader surface. So if something breaks, you don't know exactly, like, or this test is not going to tell you exactly what broke. You just know that one part of the user submitting a tweet broke. But it will be a bit harder for us to pinpoint exactly what it is. Hopefully, or a bit more difficult. Not that we can't do it, we'll find out what went wrong, but hopefully we can cover those as well with integration tests. So here's the pyramid. I realized that this pyramid is like very famous, very used in this context. But I think I was reading on Kent C. Dodds where he proposes the trophy, which I think, he coming from some, being a JavaScript developer, a web developer, makes a bit more sense. Here it says like write more unit tests than integration tests, and write more integration tests than end-to-end tests. And the lower the pyramid, the faster they are, the higher, the slower. And also, like, these lines can be a bit blurry, especially between integration tests and unit tests. And basically, Kent C. Dodds says if an integration test, if a unit test is so small that it can be covered with an integration test, you shouldn't even write the unit test. And we'll see if we can see an example of that here. So, okay, so that's sort of like introductory. We will be, some considerations we need to keep in mind is that our apps are going to be not run in the browser. They're going to be running in Node, which is a bit kind of man-bended because it's like a React app is supposed to work in the browser. But it turns out that we can simulate the most important parts of the browser in Node with something called JS DOM, which comes already with our React apps. JS DOM is a DOM implementation in JavaScript for Node. So this is going to allow us to represent our app in Node, and we don't actually, we'll never see our app, like our app will never sort of display on a screen. All that is simulated, but for our intents and our purposes, that should be enough. I mentioned Cypress, which is if you actually want to show your app on a screen and have some automated bot that goes and clicks on things instead of you being the human that does that. I think that was a point that Danny made earlier. When I was a fellow, I remember for my capstone project, I remember like the day right before the presentation, we were all like just testing the app, making sure that it worked, making sure that nothing had broken on the last pull request that we had made. And it was all by hand, just check what happens if the form is empty. What happens when we submit? Does it actually appear at the bottom, below where it's supposed to, etc. If we had written tests, that could have been like run. We could have been coded up until the last minute, and having the test that assures us that the app is running. Then we could just run our test and check if something had broken. If something had broken, we could maybe go to the earlier commit, etc. But the checking will be much faster because it will be automated. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that testing, I consider testing to be hard at first. At the beginning, was like in the stages where you are, and even in the stage where I am, like I haven't written a lot of tests for my own, and this was actually an attempt. This lesson began as an attempt to me getting more comfortable with it. And I learned some things, and I put them here in this readme. So it's hard, but as we it's just like everything we practice with attempting it, you'll get it. But we have to attempt it at least. Okay, so. Any questions or thoughts before we look into some of the code?
Alejandro, I thought there's a test tube for Jasmine.
Say that again?
Jasmine.
Jasmine. I have heard of it, but I don't remember what it is.
Yeah.
JavaScript testing framework. Oh, I see. Yeah. So this will allow us to write tests. Yeah, so we will be using something similar. It's called Jest. We'll be using Jest because it already comes with React. There is actually a few volunteers from Pursuit that have worked and contributed to Jest itself. And it already comes with React. It integrates pretty well with it. So we're going to be writing Jest for writing those tests. And we're actually going to be using a few functions from Jest. So the cool thing is that it comes already preloaded with a React app. So we're not going to have to install it. So let's talk about that here. So we're going to be using Jest, the React testing library, Jest DOM, and user events. These are all the packages. All this stuff already comes with an app that was created with Create React App. So we don't need to install anything. We can inspect our package JSON and see that this line should be there. So to run our test, we're just going to do simply npm test. So let me open up. Oops, what did I do? Let me open up the sample app that I have here. Let me go to my desktop. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just clone this repo. And again, you don't need to do this. I'm gonna be using it. There is a branch here called tested app and test written during class. These two show tests that we covered there. And they are already like finished products, so you can have those for review. Um, so I'm just gonna clone this, git clone, just in my desktop for now. And we can see that that's just has a README and a React app. So let's do React app npm install to install our dependencies. In the meantime, this is a very simple app. Is this GoFundMe page? Did you guys in 6.4 did anything with this GoFundMe page? You have to recreate it? No.
We did something similar like in the beginning when we were first learning React. We did something like this.
I see. So this is a very simple app. Is the app component is the main component. It has the state. We have a header, a recent donation, a progress bar, a form. The recent donation has a child called donation card, and those are those like color coded. The outer box, the app as a whole, header in orange, progress bar in red, the form here in green, donation list in blue, and then lighter blue, the donation card. Just to make sure, like, we have a pretty good idea of how this app could be made in React, right? Or any thoughts or questions on that? Like, maybe give me a thumbs up if you will feel comfortable building this app now. Okay, I see 2 thumbs up. I see 3. Okay. 4. How I want to hear maybe from the people that don't feel comfortable creating an app like this now. Like a lot, just to hear your thoughts. Or maybe what are some of the parts that you wouldn't be sure how to implement? I think I saw maybe Brandon, Kevin, or Marvin, or Joy. Yeah, are you guys there?
Oh, sorry. I think you cut out on my end. Can you say that one more time?
Okay, no worries. Yeah, I was just asking to give me a thumbs up if you will feel comfortable having to build this app that I have on the screen, which is like a simple GoFundMe page.
Yeah, I remember we did something. I think we did something similar, like early into the program. Yeah, it was pretty cool. I think when we were like talking about states and stuff, and just yeah, I remember seeing this GoFundMe page at some point.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'm gonna move on in that regard. Then we have a pretty good idea how this could be made. Broken down into these components. Let me check. Oh, got it. No worries. I think I saw Joy's message. Okay, no problem. Okay, cool. So this is an app that I'm gonna use to write some tests. So, well, why did I close that? Open that back. And then open code here for my app. So again, this app was bootstrapped with pre-React app, so we have already our dependencies here. We don't need to install anything. I don't have any tests. Let me take a look at this. I think all of those apps already also come with this like line that's helpful, but doesn't do, you can live without. That's pretty much it. Okay, so let's take a quick look at our first test. Let me see how I'm doing on time. Okay, So I think let's me look at some of this stuff on this page. I can also post this and kind of eliminate. So one cool thing, but again, we can live without, is having this content on a JS config JSON file. So I'm going to do that. I'm just going to go on my project. Also, I should create another branch before I go on. Let's move into that. Git checkout. Class 2. And then in here, I'm just going to create a new file in my source folder. Well, actually, it can be just outside. Called jsconfig.json. And here I'm just going to paste that. This again, we can live without, is for the autocomplete to acquire information about Jest, so that it can offer us autocomplete. Without this, we wouldn't have the autocomplete. But that's about it. We can live without, again, as I said. Okay, so let's go back here. So this is the app. So let's say, let's take a look at a simple component and a simple test. So first, to write our test, we're gonna create a folder called tests on our components folder. So in the components folder, I would just create another folder called __tests __. This is a pretty standard name for a folder that contains test files. And there we're going to create one file for the component we want to create, test. In this case, that will be donation card that test.js. This is also another convention. The name of the file will be the name of the component you're testing, .test.js, test to sort of indicate us that it's a test file. So here we have a simple component, which is a donation card, which is basically just an li that has a div. Maybe this div is not even necessary, but we have it. I think so. This app has this sort of maybe weird class names because this app was built using Bootstrap to make it look like this, and which is a bit nicer, and we don't have to care too much about the CSS because Bootstrap handles most of it for us. So we can ignore those class names. If you're interested, look at Bootstrap. I think you guys did something with Bootstrap or with what was the other one called? Material UI. So you're pretty familiar with that. And these class names are used to accomplish those visuals, but we don't care that much about that. So this is a donation card that basically is an li that shows a heading with the name of a person that was passed through props, saying that person donated an amount that was passed through props. And then under that, if the user that donated left a message, it should show up here. And that is something that gets passed through props as well. So any questions about the component itself? Or like, we can imagine what it's doing?
No, I think it's pretty straightforward. It's just like a component that just gives like the name and the amount of the person who donated, right?
That's right. Also, Marvin, I think you have a very good microphone. I can hear you very well.
Yeah, thank you.
And it's very
clear. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
It's everything ever. Thank you.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, so let's say this is an example of a unit test because we have in our components our units are in our React apps, our units are just single components, right? and React app is made out of multiple components of multiple units. Of, the building block of React app are components. So we could test this in this way. We can. I'm actually gonna copy this code and just walk through it, through what it's doing, rather than having to write it, because that's gonna take time. So here's a test that we could write, and let's take a look. So we want the donor card, the job of the donor card is to display the donor's name, a message, and an amount, right? Here we are, the first part, before that. So here is like, this could be part of a user story, we could imagine, where it says, you should, if this was the assignment, it will say, display a list of user donations with name, message, and amount. So the first part is then we import from the testing library React. We import two things, render and screen. This screen, again, is not like a real screen, it's just an abstraction for how we can think about this. And then we say render, and then we pass our component. Note that we imported our component up here, and then we just call render. Render is a function, and to render, you just invoke your component and pass it. If your component receives any props, you can pass those props, like in this case. And then here, let's just take a look at this simple test, and we can write another one. Here we just want to test that for some given props, like a name, a message, and an amount, that the component actually displays that information. This might seem like a very simple test. Well, it is a very simple test. But let's see one more after this. But basically here, we just want to make sure that our component works at its basic level, that you pass in some props and that the user is actually displaying those props. You might think about like a case where that might break is if let's say, especially by working in a team, let's say somebody changes the prop name message to message text instead of just message. If you had this test in place, somebody changed that, and maybe they didn't tell the team, or maybe maybe it passed under the radar in the code review or whatever. When you run the tests, this test should fail because somebody changed the API of our component and changed the property, the prop message to something else. Then our component now is no longer going to retrieve the right message. So that's like a simple example there. So we render first. Then after we render, we need to get elements from the screen, or we want to check if things are showing up. The way in which we do that is we call screen, and screen has a lot of queries that we can use, like get by text, for instance, is one. Get by text will get an element that is displaying this text. So I'm expecting my app to show two pieces of text, or I'm expecting this component to show two pieces of text that is, a formatted content, like saying Alejo donated $100. That should be showing up, and also the message that Alejo left, which is good luck, should also be showing up. If somebody changes the prop to something else, then we're no longer going to have Alejo donated $100. And maybe you can take a look at that as well. And then with this, we get those two elements from the, from our DOM, basically. And then we say expect the donation heading to be in the document. This is, just make sure, double check that they are actually showing up. So Any questions or thoughts on this first test?
So really, it's just sort of like reading the screen to see if that text pops up, and if it doesn't, that's how you know the test fails, right? So that's cool.
That's right.
And there's a lot more functions aside from like get by text. Like I'm assuming there's a lot of like other ways you can grab elements and stuff aside from just doing that.
That's right. We'll see a few.
Okay, cool.
So Leon, in line number 9, the render, the donation card name equal to Alejo. Is there sort of hard coding that we input, but we can change those things to variable, yeah?
That's exactly right. Yes, here I'm hard coding my name, but yes, we could use variables. In fact, it will be a bit better if we use variables because I don't have to repeat myself here.
Yep.
As well. So another test. Let's say this is a. Actually, before I look at that other scenario, any other questions? Okay, so let's say our component was a bit more complicated, and let's say our component, whenever we are looping over a list of donations, let's say a user can leave an anonymous donation. So then in that case, name will be an empty string. Maybe they leave a message and they do need to leave the amount. But let's say that in our list of donations, somebody could leave an anonymous donation in which our component will not have a name. And let's also say that our component, if there is no name, it should say anonymous or someone, maybe it says someone left a donation, something like that. Let's actually write that one here. So I'm gonna actually have to change. Oh wait, I think I will have to change a lot of the code to be reasonable. But what we could do, because I think the app. Let's see. Let me start the app. I think the app wouldn't let me submit if I don't put a name. Let's see what happens. Maybe this is a good thing. What happens if I click on donate? Oh, also, I think this app makes a network request to a mock API. Let me see. Oh, hold on, where is the network? Okay. So I guess one way in which you can improve this app is maybe this button should be disabled if the user doesn't type anything on those, right? But it's not, and we're not going into that. But let's say, what if I put a message, hi there, and then I put an amount. See, will it let me submit? Doesn't let me submit. But let's say we wanted so that the name was optional. So the user could specify the name or not. So I'm gonna see if we can change this quickly. So I'm gonna go to, I think that's probably the app component. Let's see, we have a handle submit. Form amount, raised amount. Let me maybe minimize this. Let's actually take a look at the form. Handle submit, handle for employee suit. Can look at handle submit. Prevent default, getting out everything from the state. This that post donation. Let's take a look at this function. This function just gets the donation information and it will send it, as I said, it will send it to this. This is a mock, this is an actual API, but it's for mocking purposes or testing. Post donation. I think we should be seeing then the network request being sent. Oh, let me try putting a name. Okay, put in a name and it does, we do see it popping up. there is something that's preventing me from submit the form when I don't put a name. Oh, I guess this if statement, right? The if statement is checking if there is a form donor, then do all of this other stuff.
Oh, so it's not firing, being that it's empty.
That's right, exactly. It's not firing because it's empty. Well, let's say I'm just going to remove this if statement and say all the fields are optional. And again, this is a thought exercise. So I'm going to say that, reload the page here. Let's see what happens if I hit submit. Okay, so we see that happens. There is no message, and there is no someone donated something. But let's say one thing we want to implement is, let's say someone could leave an amount and could leave a message. When they hit donate, our app should say anonymous donated or someone donated, without having to specify a name. So we could change our implementation, the implementation of our component, so that we do a simple check. We can say, let me go to the donation card. So I guess that could be as simple as, if there is no props.name, or if there's props.name, then do props.name. Otherwise, do someone. Use someone, yeah, right? Someone donated that amount. Let's try this. Reload. No, good. Good luck. Donate. Okay, now it says someone donated 149. Cool. So then that's that could be a user story, where the user story will be when a user submits, when a user doesn't specify their name in the list, it should appear as someone or anonymous donated whatever amount. Does that make sense there?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, cool. So now we just change our implementation. Now we have to test for this other story. So we're testing for the first one. And also let's make sure that our app is actually running. So to run the test, what I'm gonna do is, I wrote this test here. I'm gonna do npm test. And then that runs my file. If everything goes well, then we get passing. So that one is passing. I'm going to write a second test. I'm going to copy all this content and put it here. And I'm going to say here, like if the donation is anonymous, no, spelled anonymous. I guess that's correct. Displays someone donated X amount, right? So again, these are two different scenarios. Our app, we want to test each scenario or each user story. I guess, we couldn't really test that other scenario with this one because, we can think of it, this is one path our app can go, and we're going to test another path here. So let's say, let's make this test. Let's say, so there's not going to be a name when that happens. So I just saved, and my test now is failing, saying, this is the test that's failing. If donation is anonymous, so that's the test. That's the string that I specified here. And it's saying unable to find an element with text Alejo donated 100. That's because I still left here Alejo donated 100, and that element is not in the screen. So here I have to think about what is it that I expect to be displayed. And as we said we wanted to display someone donated 100. And now we have our two tests passing. And just to also maybe as Kong mentioned, like we could have this in some variables. Yeah, maybe I can do this. Let's say const mock data. I'm gonna say message. I'm just gonna put in an object to be a bit organized. So this is gonna be the message, and then amount 100. So then here I can say instead of this, I'll just say mock data message, and instead of the amount here, I'm gonna say mock data that amount. And then here maybe I can extrapolate this here with template literal. Instead saying someone donated mock data that amount. Let's say this. I think the test is failing. Does anybody have an idea of why it's failing? No. So the test is saying we couldn't find an element being rendered that says someone donated 100. And this is a very helpful feature. Whenever you get something like this where the query couldn't find something, you get the DOM printed out or the HTML printed out, and in here you can inspect a bit more carefully. So it's saying that someone donated then $100, and it shows it in multiple lines because it's being pre-printed, but it's actually going to be in one. So that means I just forgot the $sign before my $100.
That makes sense. Okay.
Let's save that. Let's see if our test passes now. No, our test passes there. Okay, so any questions or comments on this side about any line of code, anything?
So say if because I remember I think you touched on this like maybe like when you did the lesson the first time. So if you wanted to write like multiple tests, you would just like write them in like separate test objects, or are you able to like nest tests in any way, or like what's like I guess you're probably gonna touch on those things like later on anyway. So but yeah.
So just quickly, yes, we write for each test we call our test function. Note that this test function we don't import from anywhere. This test function, the same as the expect function, these are utilities that come from Jest, that utility that I showed earlier. And they are globally available. Like Jest makes them globally available for us to use. I guess that also is, these are known as matchers. We can say, we can even say, this is a dummy expectation, but expect 1 plus 1 to be 2, something like this. When we run, the test should pass. We make it to be 3, the test should fail. So this comes from Jest. To be is a built-in matcher that comes from Jest. To be in the document is not a built-in one, but that comes almost built-in. It comes from where does it come from? It comes from the React testing library. So, but this is one of the ones that we're going to be using, the most common one. So yeah, the way in which tests are written are you invoke the test function, and the test function receives two arguments. The first argument is the name of your test or a description of your test, and the second argument is a callback function that actually executes your test. Other questions or thoughts?
Then it's like get the
Marvin.
check for the element and then render it on the screen, sort of like so if so all tests sort of follow this similar format. Like you would render whatever component you're testing, you would get the elements expected by that test, and then you would sort of like check on like lines 31, 32, check to see if they're on the screen.
That's right.
Okay, cool.
That's right. So this is the simplest test we can write. And here, this one has that extra bit of functionality that if the name is an empty string or undefined, we check that we wanted our component to display someone donated instead of just being donated an X amount. Okay, so let's keep going here. So that was our first simple test. This test is where you can test for that your component is doing the things that it's expected to do with its props. Okay, so let's touch a little bit on, I also wrote this resource here. I tried to put together a cheat sheet. Let me share this in the chat as well. With some of the stuff that we're gonna see, we saw that you had to import render on screen, and you import your component. We saw how you render. We saw that getting the rendered elements, you can do get by label text. So this was to a question I think Marty asked earlier, like how many of them are. So there are like, these are the main queries: get by, query by, find by. Get by returns the first matching element or throws an error if no element is found. Query returns the first matching element or return null if no elements were found. So this is helpful for checking when something is not supposed to be in the screen anymore. Maybe after a user dismissed an alert or something like that. And then find by is used for asynchronous operations. It returns the promise, which resolves to the element once it has been. Once it has appeared on the screen or after 1 second has elapsed. So this one, we'll see an example of this one. For whenever we submit the form, for instance, that's going to be an asynchronous operation. Even though we're going to mock it, it's still going to be an asynchronous operation. We want to wait until the donation appears in the screen. So these are sort of the main queries: get by, query by, and you can combine this with any subqueries like get by label text, or get by, or find by role, or find by text, etc. But these are the main differences there. Basically, the return value is the main differences, and then we can get inputs by label text. We can get them by placeholder text, by role. Or by text. These are some of the ones that we're going to use most commonly. And then I linked here to more in the docs. So here we're getting like a name input. We get by label text name. Okay. Any questions or thoughts on this?
No, I just think it's really cool that like there's multiple ways to grab like elements and stuff. So I think that's really nice.
Awesome, great. And the documentation is super extensive, and I think find it is easy to get through. Okay, so let's get into maybe a more interesting case. Let me hide that. Let's keep going down here. Also, feel free to interrupt me at any point with any questions. I should have said that from the beginning. These are some of the matches we can use to be in the document, to be disabled, to have value, to have display value, to be checked. And these are just handy. Like there's ways to do it without, like you can just check the input dot checked to be true, but to be checked is a bit more expressive. Oh, actually, I think, yeah, this comes from the testing library. Just has those additional matchers. That's all linked there. These are some of them to be valid. So we can expect, for instance, if it's a date input, I would imagine, we could check if the user entered a valid date with this one. Yeah, there is some more documentation. To be visible, yeah, to have class, to have focus, there are some others there. Okay, so let's go back here. This is the cheat sheet. And as a general rule, this is sort of like how the structure of an assertion. You do expect the element or a property of the element to match or that matcher. In this case, a matcher is one of these, to be, to equal, to have value, and then in the parentheses of the matcher, you expect the expected value. Like, what is it that you expect to be the result of this assertion? So an example of that is that we saw here, where this is a simple one. The other one was like, expect this to be 3, etc. So let me say this and go back to the code here. That's the basic assertion. So let's take a look at one of the components that's a bit more complicated, which is, well, this one is similar to the previous one, the progress bar. We are just checking that, I don't have the implementation here, but the progress bar, we're checking that it displays a percentage. Wait, does it display a percentage? I think some of the tests for that one were to, I guess, let's go here really quickly. What is this here? The testing the progress bar is, I think, is simple. The progress bar, we want to just check. We want to check a few things. One is that it shows the raised amount and the target amount, and that also it shows the percentage at the bottom in this other area. I'm just going to show you how we did that in here. Wait, let me see if we can go back, go down here. Okay, let's just take a quick look at the implementation of that component. React app. That is the progress bar. So we see a few things. One is destructuring the target amount and the raised amount from props. And then we have the progress here in a percentage, which is the raised amount times 100 divided by the target amount. This is just how we can calculate a percentage. And we wanted to display an H2 that says the raised amount is X of this target amount. And this pen is there just to style it, to style the target amount differently. You may have noticed that it looks a bit gray. Okay, and then this is actually this here. These two divs are representing the progress bar with some CSS. And the inner div, we can see that there's two divs here. The gray div is one, and then the green div is another one. And we just say the green div is going to be that percentage width of the parent, which is the progress div outside. So it's like kind of interesting, simple element there. Where did I go to? Oh, yeah. Cool. So this basically just shows how much has been raised and what is the target and the percentage in this div. We can see that the way in which that is being done is with the style. Here we have this progress bar role. I'm not going to get into this too deeply, but there's something called area roles, which are for accessibility. So some people implement elements in different ways that maybe is using just divs. And then you should say, to aid in accessibility, you should say, what is the role of that element? So that example is the progress bar. Is it here? Yeah, progress bar. So this is a role that we should use if we're creating a progress bar, again, for accessibility purposes. I actually don't know much about area roles. Maybe that's something that will be cool to get a volunteer to come talk to us about. Okay, so this one is similar to the other one, where you just expect to see text that says whatever raised amount we currently have of whatever target amount, and we expect the proper percentage to be displayed. Let's take a quick look at how we did that. Actually, let me go here. I'm just going to look at the test that we wrote here. Test it up. I'm going to go back to components and then test the progress bar. Okay, so similar to the previous one, everything is the same, but we render now our progress bar. We pass some target amount, some raised amount. You can see here the same, just using some variables for that. And then we expect to see something that says raised and then the raised amount of, and something else that says the target amount. I had to break this down into two elements, into sort of two get by, because the elements are actually, well, there are two different elements. When we look at the HTML, we can see, actually not in the HTML, in the code. I guess I'm getting confused with the code that I have. And let's see, can I open this one? Progress bar. Components, test, progress bar. We can see that we have an H2, and inside of that H2 we have a span. So our text is broken down into multiple elements, is the span and the H2. That's why I had to use two queries here to get those elements. So the raised and the target. And we can see that it's just the same that we were doing before to be in the document. Here I'm asserting that the raise tag name property is an H2, just sort of to make sure. But this will fall sort of in an implementation detail that we don't need to include really there, because you know it doesn't matter if it's an H2 or a paragraph. maybe the way in which this could be better written is actually using using get by role and use heading as the role. All H2 and all H whatever number are automatically have a heading role. So we could just get the element by role. There actually, I think there is an example of that. There is an example of that, I think here. Yeah. This is how we could also do it. Well, I guess this is the structure in the get by role from the render itself, which we could do. And then we're not even saving the element to a variable. We're just doing it here, get by role heading, and then we can use it to have text content equal to the full raised amount or target amount. And so that's one test, just checking that the component is displaying the information as we want. And again, these are the simplest case, the simplest test that we have. What is the other thing here? So that's that one. I forgot I had written this here. This one is another test that checks whether the progress bar is showing the proper percentage. And what we do is, target amount and raised amount, we just sort of do the calculation in our test. And I add this percent sign at the end as a string. This is going to be just, the same string that the component should render. And then I just do screen.getByText with that progress text and expect that to be in the document. Here I can go also a bit further and say, okay, I want to make sure that the progress style width is also set to the progress text. This is asserting a little bit of like the visual side, where you're just making sure that the width is set to the same as the progress text. Any questions or thoughts on these two examples that we're just seeing? Anything might be interesting or surprising that I should go a bit further in? One question before we move on. Okay, so we won't be able to move on.
I have a question about the the progress test. The last
This
one.
part?
No, the last one.
This one.
Yeah. No, especially the progress bar style white. You have to bring the style with us.
I see. Yeah. So it turns out that you're bringing up a good point. It turns out, right, when we do screen.getByText, this actually returns the element, and we call that element progress bar. And this element is actually a DOM node. So it has all the properties that a DOM node will have. And that is, it has, like, if we have set an ID, we have an ID. If we have classes, it has like a class list. One specific one is that we're assessing for here is the style, because again, this is a DOM element. It's very much the same as if I do, let's say I highlight this one. which is actually the same one. And I do, I'm actually, this is sort of a trick that is $0. $0, when you, like if you didn't know, whenever you select an element in the page, let's say the title, and I select it, that so it's highlighted here, then I can say $0 to refer to it. If I want to inspect it, so I can do like $0 that inner text that shows me the GoFundMe, no. So in this case, I'm going to select this element, this div here, and then I'm going to go back to the console. And now $0 is pointing to that element, so I can say like inner text, and we can see that that shows the percentage. But what I actually want to see is the style, so I can say $0 that style, and then when I do that style, again, $0 refers to that element. Then here we get this thing that looks like an object. It's a CSS style declaration, and it has all CSS properties, I believe, actually, which are quite some. But then here I can then inspect $0 that style, that width, and then we get the width that we're specifying. This width that we're specifying, this is the width of the element that we specified in our code here. If I go back to our, this is progress bar. Progress bar, we can see here that for this div, we are applying a style that says that the width should be equal to the progress, but in percent sign there. So this forces this div to be that width, that specific width, which matches the progress for the current element. And then if I go back to the test, which is here, where is the test? Here. Here, so this is just me checking that the width of the element. Actually, this is me checking that the width of the element is the same as the progress text, which is if it's 50%, then if the target amount is 1,000 and the raise amount is 500, then we know that that's going to be 50%. And I want to make sure that the progress bar has the text that says 50%, but also I want to make sure that the style of that progress bar, the width is being set to 50% as well. So here is, we're asserting the style. We're actually not asserting, since there is no screen, there is no, our elements are actually not being rendered. There is no, I guess there's no guarantee that our element will actually show exactly 50% of the way there on our progress bar. We are just asserting that the style is being applied, that the width of the style is also the same as the progress text, that is 50%. Sihan, does that make it a little bit more clear?
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Cool. Mm-hmm. And just know that whenever you do a query like this, you actually have progress bar is an actual DOM element. And it's almost undistinguishable from a DOM element in the browser. It's just a DOM element from the JS DOM, but you know, they're made so that you don't have to think about it. Like you don't have to think about JS DOM. You can just think of it as an element, and then you can access all its properties like we do here. All right, so damn, I see that I'm running out of time, and I want you to try this for one of your apps. So maybe we can do that just in a few more minutes. What I'm going to do is try to wrap up here, hopefully before 4, and then 4 to 4:30, I'll have you in breakout rooms. Try it on your own, and I'll be circling around. So let's see. This is the form. I'm gonna skip this one a little bit. Yeah, I'm gonna skip this one, and I'm just gonna go to the app one. Oh, I guess let's touch on this. So the testing mindset, and I think Marvin alluded to this earlier, which is we first arrange, then we act, and then we assert. Arranging is when we do like rendering or prepare our variables. Acting is when we fire our events and simulate user interactions. We're going to see that next. And assert is when we check with expect, with the expect function that that what we're expecting our app to do is actually being done, or what we're expecting our app to display is actually being displayed. Okay, so let's take a look at this area here, which is this is the most interesting test. So here I'm gonna test the app as a whole, but you know, this app very well could be. Let me go back to it. This app very well could be maybe one of the routes in your apps. You know, like your whole app is never gonna be as simple as just this, right? You probably have some other screens. This is just a form that we saw at the beginning when we were learning React. So here, what we want to test is that these components interact well together. With the unit test, we made sure that the components, given the right props, will display the expected behavior. And we sort of covered our bases there. Now here we want to check that the form actually works, and that when the user submits a name, that it appears in the list of donations. And we'll do that then here. Let's talk about it. Okay, so the important parts here. Let's talk about firing events. So for firing events, you can use fire event or user event. Then let's see how we use those. Also in the cheat sheet, I included like why do we have two. So for firing user events like clicks, submit buttons, etc. What we're going to be using these two. Fire event comes from the testing library /React. User events comes from testing library /user event, user-event. So user event is a high-level API for most events like click, type, and select options. This is the one that we can use for the most part. So one example of that is here, where we can get the name input from a form, for instance, with screen.getByLabelText name. And then we can say user event.type, and we put the element that we want to type into, and then what text we want it to be typed. And in this case, I wanted to type Bob. So this is how we're going to simulate a user typing in the name input box, right? So that's an example there. So for more general events like moving a range slider or submitting a form, for which we don't have a way of doing with user event, we are going to use fire event. So the example here is the slider. So this slider that we have in our app, this range slider, we don't have a way of clicking and dragging and dropping, because again, we are not really in a browser environment. we have to simulate this. The way in which we're going to simulate that is as follows. Let me close this. Go back here. So we get the slider by label text in this case, and then we do fire event that change. That is the change event. And then we pass in the slider as the first argument, and the second argument is the event object, right? Which is that thing we get on all our event handlers in React for like handle submit, handle click event handlers. So this is the event object, and we have to simulate that it has a target and it has a value of 500 in this case. So this is us artificially simulating moving the slider to the value of 500, which is ultimately what the user does when they drag and drop. So this is the way in which you're going to be firing events. User event that type for like typing or clicking, we can do that with user event. If we have something a bit more general, like the slider, we're going to use fire event that change. Wait, hold on. Let me take a look at this part here. We test it out. Oh, I see. There's only 3 of you remaining in the room. Let's take a look at our components and our tests. And what am I looking for here? The app test. So the slider, hold on, let's take a look at it, the way in which I did it here. Okay, I did it just in the same way. Okay, so here is where we test the whole form. The way in which you will do that is we just import our entire component. And here's where we actually test the user story of whenever the user enters their information and hits donate, a new donation should appear on the donation list, and all the input fields should go back to blank, for example. So we'll get back to talking about this mock resolve value wise. But for now, let's just focus on, we get the inputs from the screen. We get by placeholder, get in by role. This is an example where we use role, the slider that we had, donate button for get by text. The text has a donate inside, some text inside. And then here's how we fire the event. So we can say user event that type in the name input, we want to type James Bond. In the message input, we want to type Bon Voyage. And in the amount slider, which is the slider that we have here, we don't have a way to drag and drop, as I was saying earlier. So we cannot use that with user event. We will need to do fire event. So we do fire event that change, and then we say the amount slider, we want to move the slider to 500. And then we say user event that click donate button. This will fire the click in the donate button, and that's all fine. Even before we look at the Axios mock, any questions or thoughts about this part that I have highlighted currently on the screen? Calm.
No, I don't have an issue.
Okay. And Sihan, raise your hand. Any questions or thoughts on this part?
No.
Okay. All right. So that is how we can simulate the event. But what we're actually interested in is we want to make sure that that our component is actually firing a network request, firing an Axios call, network request, or API call, whatever you want to call it, and that we have information that's showing up. The way in which we do that is is knowing a little bit of the implementation of our component, which we know our component will ask Axios. I think, and it will be interesting to do it in Firebase because the Firebase, if we're testing the user authentication, will be different. But the point is that we need to mock that external thing. In this case, it's Axios. The way in which we do that is we import Axios from Axios, and this name doesn't matter. I just decided to call it Axios mock to tell it apart. But we import Axios, and then we say jest that mock Axios, and jest under the hood will perform some stuff for mocking Axios, so that when our app calls Axios, it doesn't call the real Axios. It calls a mock version that we can modify. So here, and this may be the most obscure part. To mock, what we do is say Axios that whatever method we want to post. In this case, whatever method we want to mock. In this case, I want to mock the post method because I'm sending a post request. And then I say that mock resolve value once. This is a special function that will, the documentation speaks more about it, but this will let us mock the result of a post request. And what we do is when we call that function, we put in the mocked response data that we want. So this is sort of indicating just, okay, when my app calls Axios.post, I want you to give it this data in return, basically. And that's what we do with mock resolve value one. So what we do there is now then how we can make that assertion is we can say, okay, we can say Axios mock.post, expect that to have been called one time. Expect that after I have clicked my button, my component fire a network request with Axios. So that's the first part. The second part is we can say, okay, furthermore, I want to expect that whenever my component call Axios.post, that it was called with this information. And you may remember, or you should remember that when you call Axios.post, the first argument you pass is the URL that you want to send your data to, and then the second is the data that you want to send. Right. So here we're saying, okay, the user typed in this information, James Bond, Bon Voyage, for in the input boxes. So whenever we submit that information, we want to expect that we get back the same information, which is the same amount, the same message, the same name. Sorry, no, this is we want to expect that Axios.post was called with that information. And this is what we do in here, to have been called with. These functions, these are linked in the documentation. I'm just realizing I'm throwing a lot at you right now. But just bear with me and follow what I'm showing you here. and then maybe we can look at some individual use cases in the remaining time as you're working with this. I want you to try it, and I'll be here to guide you. But so basically here we're mocking Axios. We are expecting that our component at some point call Axios.post and that it called it with the information that we are expecting. Then after that, we can indicate to our component, okay, wait for the asynchronous operations to happen, which will be the Axios post part. And then that's why I have to do a wait. And we do a wait screen that find by text. And what I'm doing here is waiting that after the user filled in the form and after the user submitted the form and after Axios.post was called, that a donation header should appear in the screen, and that donation should say James Bond donated $500. Here, as Kong mentioned earlier, it's probably be better to have all these variables, these names in variables at the top so that I don't have to hard code these strings in a few different places. But here we are just expecting that after we submitted, we are expecting a new card to appear on our donation list that says James Bond donated $500. And then again, here we're just checking that that's an H5 if we want to. And we are doing the same for the message. We expect that the new donation card to be showing up after the submission of the form saying James Bond donated 500 and the message that James Bond left there. So from these questions or thoughts? And also thank you very much for sticking around.
No problem. So because you're giving all those things a lot at once, you know, can we like maybe break down like the whole session like into like 1 or 2 sessions, so next time is easier to people to understand, because like you are going on your pace, you know, so sometimes it's harder to understand all of them, you know. Yeah,
That's definitely something I'll take into account. Thank you for that.
yeah.
Let me take note of that.
But thank you so much, you know.
Yeah, but again, like what I actually want, like in this 30 minutes that we have, I want you to try it out. I want you to try it out with maybe with your with any of your apps. So let's do that now. And then here, I guess, you know, we're a small chunk. So why don't we do it? Let's does anybody wanna like share the screen, and let's test a simple component.